Welcome to True Echo, where the stories echo louder than silence and the truth always finds a voice. If you've ever felt the weight of injustice or the power of redemption, you're in the right place. Today's story is one that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Let's begin. The cemetery was quiet that afternoon, the sun laying golden light across rows of cold stone and wilted flowers. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead, but the little girl didn't move. Amira sat cross-legged in the grass, her frizzy curls held back with a pink clip far too old and faded to still shine. She held a worn photo close to her chest and whispered to the headstone like it could hear her. "I'm sorry I didn't come last week, Mama. They said I couldn't leave without permission. But I brought the sandwich, like we used to." She opened a bag, revealing a slightly squashed peanut butter sandwich. Her voice trembled. She was 8, maybe 9, too young for grief to hang so heavy. The gravestone read: Layla Hassan, 1987 to 2022. Visionary. Mother. Fighter. To the world, Layla had been a successful tech CEO, a rare black woman in a white boardroom, praised for breaking ceilings, until she died. A single car crash. Closed casket. No media noise. No lawsuits. Just, gone. The whispers had followed Amira ever since. Kids at school called her Orpho. Some teachers pitied her. Others just ignored her. Her foster parents didn't talk about Layla at all. When she tried asking about her mom's company, they told her it didn't matter anymore. But Amira remembered everything. The bedtime lullabies. The hugs. The way her mom's voice changed when she talked about her dreams, about leaving something behind that would protect Amira long after she was gone. That dream was buried with her. Or so it seemed. A car engine purred nearby. A sleek black Maserati slowed beside the cemetery gate. The man behind the tinted glass wasn't dressed for mourning, dark tailored suit, phone still buzzing in his hand, but when his eyes met the girl sitting by the stone, something stopped him. He lowered the window. His breath caught. Amira. Those eyes. He parked fast, stepped out slow. His shoes crunched gravel as he moved closer. The girl looked up, startled but not scared. His gaze fell to the headstone. And then his stomach dropped. Layla Hassan. Thomas Gray hadn't heard that name in years. Thomas Gray stood frozen beside the small grave. His tailored suit, crisp and commanding in every setting, now felt heavy and out of place. The wind picked up slightly, ruffling the edges of the photo in Amira's lap. He glanced down and saw it, Layla smiling, her arms wrapped around a baby girl with those unmistakable eyes. Thomas remembered that smile. Back when Layla Hassan had pitched her company, LHN Technologies, to the board at his firm, she was electric, brilliant, persuasive, relentless. And young. Too young, some of them had said, and black in a room of executives who never said the quiet part out loud. But Layla didn't back down. She had something they couldn't deny: results. She'd tripled the firm's revenue in less than 2 years, cracked a data protocol no one else could solve, and caught the attention of investors from Silicon Valley to London. That's when the vultures circled. When Thomas's company, Greycore Holdings, acquired LHN, he remembered how strange it was that Layla seemed wary. Almost like she knew something was coming. Then, 6 weeks later, she was gone. A car crash. Midnight. No autopsy report made public. Just a quick statement from the company's PR team about the loss of a bright visionary, and then silence. Thomas shook himself out of the memory and crouched beside Amira. "Hey," he said gently. "What's your name?" She looked at him, cautious. "Amira." He gave a small nod. "That's a beautiful name. I knew your mom. A long time ago." Amira's eyes widened. "You knew Mama?" He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "Yeah. I worked with her. She was one of the smartest people I've ever met. The girl blinked. Then why doesn't anyone talk about her anymore? That question hit him harder than any shareholder meeting ever had. He glanced again at the grave. That's a very good question. That night, Thomas didn't go home. Instead, he sat in his office well past midnight, digging into everything he could find about Layla Hassan. It had been years. But as CEO of Greycore, he had access to archived internal records. He pulled up her old employee file, board meeting logs, and digital correspondence. Buried in a red flag folder was a document he didn't remember ever seeing. Formal complaint, internal discrimination report. Filed, October 17, 2022. Filed by Layla Hassan. Subject, harassment and threats from senior executive, name redacted. The document was sealed. And it had a single, ominous note scribbled on a scanned sticky tab. Handled. Don't dig. Thomas leaned back in his chair, pulse pounding. He clicked through the time-stamped logs. The complaint had been entered, and then vanished, 2 days before her crash. Not resolved. Not dismissed. Just deleted. He checked the legal database. No police follow-up. No internal HR investigation. But Layla had flagged a serious threat against herself. And someone had made sure that warning never saw daylight. Thomas stood up slowly. For the first time in years, his empire felt like it was built on rotting wood. The next morning, he made a call to an old contact in legal, a woman named Marion who'd worked on compliance cases before the acquisition. "What do you remember about Layla Hassan?" he asked bluntly. Marion paused. She was smart. Too smart. She had enemies upstairs. Enemies? There was talk she was going to blow the whistle. On something big. Harassment. Maybe more. Then she died. Everyone said accident, but, you didn't hear it from me, she was scared. Thomas's chest tightened. She mentioned you, Marion added. Said you were the only one who didn't look through her like glass. Said you listened. He dropped his head into his hand. He had listened, just not closely enough. Not when it mattered. That evening, Thomas made another stop at the cemetery. This time, Amira wasn't alone. Her foster mother stood nearby, arms crossed, clearly irritated. She shouldn't be talking to strangers, she snapped as Thomas approached. I'm not a stranger, he said calmly. And I have every right to be here. He handed Amira a small, wrapped box. Something of your mother's. I found it today. Inside, Amira opened it to find a silver bracelet engraved with the initials LHN, the company her mother had built from nothing. Her eyes welled up. Thomas turned to the foster mother. Do you know what happened to Layla's estate? The woman shrugged. They said she died broke. We were told there wasn't a will. There was, Thomas said coldly. And a trust. For Amira. The woman said nothing, but her face twisted with the kind of discomfort that only comes from being caught in a lie you didn't even know you were telling. Amira looked up. Is Mama's company still alive? Thomas stared at her. It was a question he couldn't answer yet. But he knew what he had to do. The boardroom was ice cold, not because of the air conditioning but because of the stairs. Thomas Gray stood at the head of the glass conference table on the 34th floor of Greycore Holdings. The skyline of downtown Manhattan stretched behind him, a stunning view he no longer cared about. In front of him sat 12 executives, each with expensive watches, monogrammed pens, and masks of calm confidence they'd perfected over years of boardroom bloodshed. But today, Thomas wasn't here for their votes. He was here to tell them the truth. I found the complaint, he began, his voice steady but low. The one filed by Layla Hassan days before she died. It was buried. There was a beat of silence, followed by rustling suits and sideways glances. Charles Berriman, CFO, leaned back with a smirk. Thomas, that was years ago. Why dig up ghosts? Thomas didn't flinch. Because she didn't die by accident. Because this company, our company, made sure she disappeared twice. Once from the world, and once from the record. Another executive chuckled nervously. With all due respect, Tom, you sound like a man grieving someone you barely knew. That did it. Thomas slammed a thick folder onto the table, printouts of Layla's deleted complaint, internal memos, and the trust fund that had somehow never reached her daughter. On top, he placed a photo, Layla holding baby Amira in a hospital room, her eyes bright with exhausted joy. I didn't barely know her, Thomas growled. I admired her. I respected her. And I failed her. The room went dead silent. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a signed check. He held it over the shredder position beside the head chair. This is the next round of funding for our satellite acquisition, he said. If you don't agree to reopen Layla's case, dissolve the merger, and pay every cent owed to her daughter, this company burns with me. There were gasps. Charles stood up, red-faced. You'd sink a billion-dollar empire over some charity case. Thomas turned to him slowly. Over justice. And then, without breaking eye contact, he fed the check into the shredder. The sound was horrifying, and final. By the end of the day, legal teams had been called. NDAs were revoked. An emergency press briefing was scheduled. Thomas drafted the statement himself, pacing the same office where Layla had once presented her vision to a skeptical room of men who had smiled, nodded, and schemed against her. That night, Amira waited again at her mother's grave, clutching the silver bracelet. The city skyline glowed in the distance. She had told the foster mother she needed time alone, but a voice behind her said softly, "You're not alone." She turned. Thomas stood there, this time not in a suit but in jeans and a soft wool coat. He sat beside her. I did something today, he said, glancing at the gravestone. Something I should have done years ago. She tilted her head. Did you tell people about Mama? He nodded. I did. And tomorrow the whole world will know what they did to her. He handed her another box, this one heavier. She opened it carefully. Inside were her mother's recovered journals, scanned and printed from a digital archive Thomas's team had uncovered. There were notes, letters, and a deed to a trust account originally meant for Amira's 10th birthday. And on top, sealed in a simple envelope, was a letter with her name written in graceful handwriting. She touched it with trembling fingers. She wrote this for me? Amira whispered. She did, Thomas replied. She wanted to make sure you had her voice, even if she couldn't be here. Amira didn't open it yet. Instead, she leaned quietly against him. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like just another lost girl in the system. By the next morning, the news exploded. Billionaire CEO exposes corruption within own company. Whistleblower's death re-examined after shocking internal report surfaces. Forgotten CEO's daughter awarded $48 million in settlement, legal action pending. Public outcry surged. Protesters gathered outside Greycor's headquarters. Former employees of LHN began sharing stories of what Layla had gone through: racial bias, exclusion from major deals, passive sabotage masked as company politics. One ex-staffer shared an email chain in which Layla's leadership had been described by a VP as affirmative action with lipstick. That man resigned within the hour. Thomas stood before the cameras with Amira beside him. He didn't use a script. We were wrong. We silenced a woman whose only crime was being too brilliant to ignore. We let racism wear a suit and call itself strategy. From this day forward, we change, not with words, but with actions. The room erupted into applause. But Amira didn't flinch. She reached up and held his hand. She didn't know what a CEO was yet. But she knew what a fighter looked like. And she knew her mother was finally being heard. The days that followed were a storm. Greycore's stock wavered in the early hours after the press conference but stabilized surprisingly quickly. Investors, initially stunned, rallied behind the rare sight of accountability from a billionaire CEO. Public trust surged. The media, always hungry for a redemption arc, praised Thomas Gray for doing what few dared, sacrificing silence for truth. But Thomas wasn't interested in praise. He was busy reading every page of Layla Hassan's journals. Late at night in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by the faint hum of the city below, he read her thoughts, some angry, some hopeful, some heartbreaking. One entry stuck with him. They don't want me in their world. They want my ideas, my data, my breakthrough, but not me. If something happens to me, I want Amira to know, I did this for her. So she'd never have to beg to be seen. Thomas closed the journal and exhaled slowly. That line haunted him. Meanwhile, Amira had been moved, permanently, into a warm, spacious home not far from Central Park. The apartment had been in Layla's name but never activated. Her trust, once suppressed, now funded every need, private schooling, therapy, legal counsel, and more. Amira still visited the grave every Saturday, but now, she had company. Her new guardian wasn't Thomas, though he remained deeply involved, but a former colleague of Layla's named Tasha, who had quietly left the company after Layla's death. Tasha had testified during the internal probe and revealed something no one had seen coming. They called Layla too ambitious behind closed doors, Tasha told investigators. When she raised concerns, they said she was paranoid. But I remember her locking her laptop before walking to meetings, like she knew someone was watching. And that complaint she filed. She sent me a copy. She told me, if something happens, tell the world. But I was scared. Her voice had cracked under the weight of guilt. Thomas didn't blame her. Not anymore. They'd all been scared. But fear didn't excuse silence. That's why he made the next move. 3 weeks after the scandal broke, Thomas stood before a lecture hall packed with corporate executives and university students. The occasion was the Ethics and Leadership Summit at Columbia University. The media was in attendance, cameras trained on him like snipers. His speech was streamed live. He stepped up to the podium, holding no notes. I want to tell you about a woman named Layla Hassan. A photo appeared behind him on the screen, Layla in a lab, wearing goggles, grinning as she held a small chip between tweezers. She wasn't just brilliant. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a mother. A creator. And she was betrayed by the very system that celebrated her accomplishments on LinkedIn while quietly pushing her out of boardrooms. The audience leaned in. She filed a formal complaint. She warned us. And within days, she was gone. The crash that took her life was too clean. The aftermath too silent. But the truth? It never really dies. It waits. Thomas paused, scanning the crowd. I stand here not as a hero, but as a man who looked the other way. And I'm telling you now, racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a suit, nods in a meeting, and deletes an email. Gasps rippled through the room. Then, thunderous applause. Back at home, Amira opened the letter. She waited until the night of her 9th birthday. Tasha lit a candle and stepped out, giving her the space to read alone. The envelope was soft from age. Inside, folded delicately, was a letter in Layla's careful handwriting. My sweet Amira. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to watch you grow the way I hoped. I want you to know one thing, you are not broken. You are not less. You are a light they will try to dim, but never can. Build. Dream. Trust yourself. There will be people who see you only as a shadow. But you are the sun, baby girl. You are every sunrise I ever fought for. I hope someone told you that by now. But if they didn't, I will. I am proud of you. Love always. Mama. Asterisk. Amira's tears fell quietly. But they weren't tears of sadness alone. They were tears of finally being seen. In the months that followed, Layla's name returned, not as a footnote, but as a force. Universities began teaching the Hassan case in business ethics classes. A scholarship was created in her name for young black girls entering STEM fields. And most surprising of all, Greycore formally rebranded one of their divisions as Hassan Labs. Thomas gave Amira the final say. She had nodded. Only if her name stays on the door. Forever. And it did. What once had been erased was now engraved, in legacy, in learning, in law. But for Thomas, none of it felt like victory. It felt like justice, long overdue. A soft snow blanketed the city. It had been nearly 1 year since Thomas Gray stopped his car at that cemetery and saw Amira crying at the grave of her mother. In that time, the world had changed, not in sweeping headlines or viral hashtags alone, but in the quiet corners where real lives were rebuilt. Amira now smiled more. She was still the same curious, thoughtful girl, but her shoulders sat higher, her eyes clearer. At school, her teachers spoke of her wit, her reading level, and how she carried herself with a grace beyond her years. When asked who inspired her, she didn't hesitate. My mom, she'd say. And the man who remembered her. Thomas remained a constant in her life. He didn't try to replace Layla. He knew he couldn't. But he was there, at school events, science fairs, and once, nervously, at a father-daughter dance where Amira dragged him onto the floor despite his awful rhythm. Meanwhile, Greycore wasn't just surviving. It was evolving. The company had launched a new initiative under Amira's name, the Hassan Fellowship, funding projects by women of color in tech. For every dollar Greycore made from LHN's original patents Layla created, 10 cents went into the fund. The press praised the move. But there were those who weren't clapping. In a luxury high-rise across town, former board members whispered over scotch. One, a man named Robert Langston, stared bitterly at his tablet, watching Thomas speak at another diversity conference. This isn't about ethics, Langston sneered. It's about control. He's turned a scandal into a rebranding stunt. And now the kid is the face of it all. Another former exec muttered, we could have ridden this out. Instead, he threw us all to the wolves. Langston set his glass down hard. Maybe it's time someone reminded him how replaceable he is. They didn't know that their conversations were being monitored. Thomas, ever the strategist, had anticipated this. A week before Layla's complaint resurfaced, he had installed a new AI-based surveillance safeguard throughout the company's legal archives, and extended it to a private network tracking corporate sabotage. Layla's files weren't the only ones buried. And Thomas had begun digging deeper. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting, this time, not with shareholders, but with federal investigators. I have reason to believe certain executives colluded to eliminate whistleblowers, he said plainly. Layla wasn't the only one who raised red flags. There were 2 others. He handed over flash drives, one marked 2021, internal audit suppressed, the other, 2020, harassment reports ignored. These women spoke up, he continued. One was paid to disappear. The other? She vanished from our radar entirely. I want them found. I want this rooted out. All of it. The agent across from him studied Thomas carefully. Why now? Thomas didn't hesitate. Because for too long, silence has been mistaken for strength. I won't be another CEO who profits from a grave. The investigation launched within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Amira visited her mother's grave with Tasha. She brought with her a framed newspaper clipping that had her own name in the headline. Amira Hassan becomes youngest honorary fellow in tech philanthropy. She set it gently beside the stone. I hope you're watching, she whispered. They remember you now, Mama. Tasha put an arm around her. They'll never forget her. Because of you. As they walked away, a woman in a beige trench coat stepped out from behind a large oak tree. She had tears in her eyes and trembling hands. It was one of the silenced, Jasmine Tran, a former project engineer who had disappeared from Greycore's employee directory in 2021 after filing a similar complaint to Layla's. Jasmine had seen the headlines, the apology, the reparation efforts. And for the first time, she felt safe enough to be seen. Later that week, she came forward to investigators. Her testimony was explosive. They told me if I said anything, I'd never work again. They erased my credentials from projects I led. And when I tried to reach out to HR, my badge didn't work the next day. I had to leave town. Her voice shook. But Layla, she emailed me the night before she died. She told me she wasn't going to run anymore. That she'd fight. That if they silenced her, someone would carry it on. She looked up at the agents. That someone was her daughter. Back at Greycore, Thomas stared at a digital board showing every department that had been restructured, every name attached to Layla's original patents, and every executive still quietly resisting. He drew a red circle around the last name left untouched, Langston. A quiet war was still being waged. And Thomas wasn't done. Thomas Gray didn't sleep much that week. Every evening blurred into the next, his office light the last to go out on the 34th floor. His inbox was flooded with legal briefings, whistleblower updates, and new forensic audits unearthing years of corruption. For every thread he pulled, another two unraveled. But one name kept appearing. Robert Langston. The man was untouchable, on paper. His contracts were ironclad, his fingerprints absent from anything damning. Yet everywhere the damage went deepest, Langston's influence loomed just behind the curtain. Until one night, Thomas received an anonymous package. No return address. No note. Inside, a single USB drive and a photograph. The photo showed Langston at a 2022 charity gala, standing beside Layla Hassan. What struck Thomas wasn't their posture or expressions, but Layla's clenched jaw. And the timestamp on the digital metadata, just 6 hours before her crash. Thomas plugged in the drive. It contained encrypted audio files and partial email records. His tech team ran a deep decode overnight. By morning, the contents were clear. An audio file, Layla's voice, frantic, recorded on her phone. If anything happens to me, tell Thomas. Tell him Langston threatened to pull my funding if I didn't sign over the patent rights. I said no. I told him I'd take it public. And now I'm scared. Really scared. The rest was static. Thomas stood up slowly, his hands white-knuckled around the edge of his desk. This was no longer speculation. It was premeditated corporate silencing. And now, he had proof. That afternoon, Thomas called an emergency press conference. News vans swarmed the street outside Greycore's headquarters. The public had watched his earlier confession with sympathy. Now, they watched with urgency. Thomas stepped up to the podium and held up the photograph. This woman, Layla Hassan, was more than a CEO. She was a mother. A builder. A voice silenced by greed. He played the audio recording. The silence in the room afterward was deafening. And this man, Thomas said, holding up Langston's company ID, used power as a weapon. Not just against Layla, but against the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some reporters stood in disbelief. I filed federal charges, Thomas continued. Effective immediately, Robert Langston has been stripped of all titles and privileges, and Greycore will be cooperating fully in the criminal investigation. He paused. We are not just rewriting our future. We are correcting our past. The fallout was swift and brutal. Langston was arrested within 48 hours, led from his Upper East Side apartment in handcuffs as cameras rolled. Prosecutors uncovered layers of fraud, extortion, and strategic suppression of whistleblower complaints. He faced decades behind bars. Greycor's board, what remained of it, voted unanimously to restructure under a new oversight model with third-party compliance monitors. But Thomas knew one thing clearly. It wasn't enough to punish the guilty. They had to honor the silenced. 2 weeks later, a new building opened just outside of D.C., a towering, glass-wrapped innovation center with one bold name across the top in gold letters. The Layla Hassan Institute for Equity and Innovation. Inside, it housed scholarships, research labs, tech incubators for marginalized creators, and a public archive of whistleblower protections and legal aid. Amira cut the ribbon with a pair of golden scissors far too big for her hands. Thomas knelt beside her, whispering, "She'd be proud of you." Amira nodded, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "Of you, too." Later that night, Amira sat in her new room, flipping through her mother's journal. She stopped on a page dated just a week before Layla's death. "They want me gone. But if I let them win, what does that say to my daughter? So I'll keep speaking, keep building, even if they call it too much. I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing it for her. And for every little girl who's told to wait her turn." Amira didn't cry. She closed the journal, placed it by her bedside, and looked out the window at the city skyline. Her turn had come. But she wouldn't wait. Spring came early to the city that year. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the edge of the park where Amira now spent her Saturday mornings, not at the grave, but at the outdoor tables of the Hassan Institute's reading garden. She often came with a book, sometimes a friend from her new school, and sometimes just her mother's journal clutched in her bag like a secret she wasn't ready to share. Today, she was waiting for someone. Thomas Gray arrived right on time. He'd aged since all this began. Not in years, but in gravity. His once perfect posture had a slight lean, and his smile came slower now, tempered by everything they'd uncovered. But when he saw Amira wave him over, he smiled like it was the first time all over again. She handed him a peanut butter sandwich. "I made it. Like Mama used to." He took it with both hands like it was sacred. "Best offer I've had all week." They sat in silence for a while, watching volunteers file into the institute building behind them, young women with purpose, young men with notebooks, each one walking into a future Layla had never lived to see but made possible. Thomas finally said, "You know, when I was your age, I didn't even know what a CEO was." Amira smirked. "Yeah. I bet you didn't cry at graves, either." He shook his head. "No. But I probably should've." She grew quiet. "Do you think she knew what they were planning?" "I think she knew enough to be afraid," he replied. "But I also think she believed someone would carry her voice forward." Amira looked down at her bracelet, LHN still engraved on its silver surface. "Sometimes I hear her in my head. When I'm scared. When I feel like people only see the headlines and not me." Thomas nodded. "That means she's still with you." They sat for a moment, the kind of silence that needed no filling. Then Amira asked the question she'd been holding in her heart for months. "Do you think I'll be like her?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the final ruling in the Langston case, sealed now, but one line had been highlighted in yellow. Motivated by greed and institutionalized bias, the defendant's actions directly contributed to a fatal outcome that would have otherwise been preventable. He handed it to her. "You already are." In the months that followed, Amira spoke for the first time at a public event. It was the annual Tech Equity Summit, and she stood on stage wearing a bright yellow dress with a microphone clipped to her collar. She was just 9, but when she spoke, the room hushed like it was listening to a world leader. "My mom built something from nothing," she said. "But people were scared of her light. So they tried to blow it out. But what they didn't know, is light spreads. Even when you can't see it anymore, it keeps going." That's me. I'm her echo. The room broke into applause. Thomas stood in the back, clapping with pride. Tasha wept beside him. A woman from the State Department pulled out her phone and whispered, "That girl's going to change the world." By the time Amira turned 10, her mother's story had become part of national curricula. The Hassan Principle was taught at top business schools, an ethics model requiring full transparency and survivor-led reviews in corporate misconduct cases. And once a month, without fail, Thomas and Amira returned to the same cemetery. Not to mourn, but to remember. They would lay fresh flowers. Share stories. Laugh at the ridiculous names Layla had given her startup projects, Code NATO, Bite Me, and one simply named Yaz Cloud. Amira never let her mother become a statue. She kept her human. Real. Alive. That Saturday, Thomas brought something new. A final letter. It was from Layla, sealed in a legal envelope, written a month before her death, held in private archives by her attorney, and only released now after the final lawsuit had closed. Amira opened it slowly. Thomas stepped back to give her space. "My love, if you're reading this, it means the battle outlived me. But that doesn't scare me. You do. You scare me, in the best way, because you're already stronger than I ever was. I can't protect you from everything. But I can promise you this, you were never alone. You were always worth the fight. And no matter who tries to silence your story, remember, you come from a line of women who don't whisper. We roar. Now go light the world up, baby girl. Mama." Amira pressed the letter to her chest. Then, she looked at the headstone and whispered, "I will." Layla Hassan may have died in silence, but her daughter spoke her name back into the world. And with the help of a man who finally chose truth over comfort, a legacy once buried became the foundation for something greater. Because justice isn't just punishment. It's restoration. It's legacy. It's the roar that follows a voice once silenced. If you felt the power of this story, don't just let it fade, share it, comment below with where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories that speak truth, even when it hurts. Until next time, this is True Echo, where every voice matters.